The fog came first. A gray and silent ghost creeping down from the high peaks to smother Sagebrush Bend. It clung to the raw timber of the buildings, beaded on the single pane of glass in Eliza Hart's window, and turned the world outside into a realm of indistinct shapes and muffled sounds. It was a fitting shroud for a departure. Inside her room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, the air was cold enough to see her breath by the weak light of a single kerosene lamp. She folded her last woolen shawl and placed it in the small valise on her bed. Her larger trunk was already gone, surrendered an hour ago to a sleepy porter with calloused hands and averted eyes. Everyone in Sagebrush Bend averted their eyes now when they looked at her, if they looked at all. For 2 weeks, since Thomas Whitfield had stood on this very street and publicly rescinded his proposal of marriage, Eliza had become a ghost herself, a walking specter of small-town disgrace. She was 24 years old, the town's only schoolteacher, and now its primary source of gossip. The whispers followed her like the red dust that settled on every surface she had been too forward, too educated for her own good. She had pressured him, poor Thomas, his mother, a woman whose smile was as thin and sharp as a shard of glass, had made certain that version of the story was the one that stuck. It was simpler than the truth, which was that Thomas had a taste for whiskey and a weak spine, a combination that had led to a promise he had no intention of keeping. But in Sagebrush Bend, the truth was a commodity far less valuable than the reputation of the banker's son. A rectangle of stiff paper lay on the small washstand beside a porcelain basin. Union Pacific Railroad, one way. Sagebrush Bend, Colorado Territory to San Francisco, California, departing at 6:47 in the morning. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the printed letters. It felt less like a ticket and more like a pardon. In San Francisco. No one would know the name Eliza Hart. No one would offer her that particular blend of pity and condemnation that had become her daily bread. She could be anyone, a new teacher, a seamstress, a librarian, anything but the woman who was jilted in the street. She pulled on a pair of black leather gloves, tucking the ticket carefully into the palm of one. The town was beginning to stir. The groan of a wagon axle, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the lowing of cattle in the pens near the station. Sagebrush Bend was not a pretty town. It was a place of utility, scraped out of the unforgiving land. The main street was a wide gash of dirt, bracketed by wooden sidewalks that creaked underfoot. The signs on the mercantile, the saloon, and the bank were faded, their letters scoured by wind and sand into pale suggestions of their former selves. It was a hard place, and it had a hard memory. It would never forget her shame. So she had to leave it behind, miles away, where Ransom Creek cut a silver path through a valley of aspen and pine. Cole Ransom smelled the coming autumn on the wind. It was a crisp, clean scent, edged with the threat of frost. He had been pushing a small herd of cattle up to the higher grazing meadows for the last week, a solitary job that suited him. The world made more sense to him up here, with only the rustle of the leaves and the steady breathing of his horse for company. He was a man shaped by solitude and silence. The rumors that clung to him back in town were as persistent as the mountain fog, but they were of a different sort than the ones that plagued Eliza Hart. They said he was rich, that he had come into his money back east through means that were not entirely reputable. They said he kept to himself because he had something to hide. Cole never bothered to correct them. He let the talk flow around him, as inconsequential as the creek water flowing over stones. The children on the outlying ranches knew a different Cole Ransom. They knew the man who could carve a perfect wooden bird with his pocket knife, who knew the names of the constellations, and who never spoke down to them. To them, he was not a mystery, just Mr. Cole. As the sun began to burn through the mist, turning the sky the color of a pale pearl, he guided his horse down the familiar trail toward Sagebrush Bend. He needed supplies. More than that, he needed to gauge the town's mood, to listen without seeming to He rode into the east end of town just as the 6:30 train from Denver was pulling in, its steam engine sighing a great white plume into the cold air. It was then that he saw her. He did not know her name, only that she was the school teacher. He had seen her once or twice at the Mercantile, a woman with intelligent eyes and a quiet dignity. Now, that dignity was a shield. She stood on the platform, her back ramrod straight, handing a small bag to the conductor. There was a finality in the gesture that caught his attention. She was not seeing someone off. She was leaving. The set of her jaw was tight. A small, brave defense against a world of staring eyes. He noted it, filed it away. Another soul seeking an escape from this hard-scrabble place. He nudged his horse on toward the livery stable, the image of the woman on the platform receding behind him. 2 lives, running on parallel tracks, had just brushed past each other in the morning mist, entirely unaware. Eliza felt the vibration of the platform through the thin soles of her boots as she stepped aboard the train. She found her seat, a worn, plush bench next to a grimy window, and sat without looking back. She did not want to see the town one last time. She wanted to feel it disappear. From her new vantage point, she saw the life of Sagebrush Bend play out in small, dismissive gestures. She saw Mrs. Gable, the mother of one of her brightest students, cross the street with her basket, her head turned pointedly away. She saw Sheriff Bill Morrison leaning against a post in front of his office, polishing a badge on his vest, his expression carefully neutral. He was a man who valued order above all else, and her broken engagement had been a messy, disorderly affair. He would be glad to see it, and her gone. Even Mrs. Henderson, her landlady, who had been kind in a flustered, worried way, had simply pressed a paper-wrapped biscuit into her hand at the door. "For the journey, dear," she had whispered, her eyes full of a pity that stung more than any scorn. Pity was a cage, and Eliza longed for the open air. The train gave a sudden lurch, the great steel wheels groaning in protest. This was it, the beginning of her new life. The train was a magnificent, terrible machine, a beast of iron and steam that could erase the past 1 mile at a time. It was a power greater than the judgment of a small town. Cole left his horse with the stable boy and walked toward Patterson's Mercantile. The place smelled of coffee beans, leather, and chewing tobacco. Mr. Patterson, a man whose ledger books were his Bible, stood behind the counter. He was also the head of the town's small school board. "Morning, Ransom," Patterson said, his eyes already calculating. "Patterson," Cole replied, his voice a low rumble. "I need a box of 10-penny nails, and 3 panes of window glass, the 20 by 30. Patterson raised an eyebrow. "Building something?" "Fixing something," Cole corrected him smoothly. He did not elaborate. He never did. He paid in cash, the crisp bills silencing any further questions. As Patterson wrapped the glass in thick paper, he cleared his throat. "Heard the news, I suppose," the shopkeeper said, unable to contain himself, "about the teacher, Miss Hart, leaving on the morning train." Cole's hands, which were tying twine around the parcel of nails, went still for a fraction of a second. "Is that so?" It was not a question. "Yes, indeed. A shame, in a way. The children liked her. But after that business with young Whitfield, well, it is for the best. Not a good example. You understand." Cole understood perfectly. He understood the town's brittle, self-serving morality. He picked up his purchases. "Thank you, Patterson." He walked out of the store, his long strides eating up the creaking boardwalk. The distant whistle of the train sounded again, a final, piercing cry as it began to pull away from the station. He had heard about the teacher, of course. Maria Torres, his housekeeper, brought him all the news from town, whether he wanted it or not. He knew about the broken engagement. He had dismissed it as the usual town drama. He had not realized it would come to this. He did not head back to Ransom Creek. Instead, he took a less traveled path that led up into a small, secluded meadow a few miles from town. There, nestled amongst a stand of aspens, was his secret, a schoolhouse. It was nearly finished, a single room, built of sturdy, hand-hewn logs, with a tight-planked roof and a wide porch. Inside, 6 small wooden desks and benches he had built himself were stacked against one wall. A brand-new pot-bellied stove stood cold in the corner. Leaning against the far wall, waiting to be hung, was a large, smooth piece of slate, a blackboard, pristine and unused. This place was Cole's penance and his hope. It was his answer to the ghosts of a past in Boston he never spoke of. It was for the children of the tenant ranchers and farmhands, children like young Manuel, whose hands were clever but who could not read his own name, or little Sophia, whose mind was as quick as a hummingbird but had never held a book. Maria had been after him for a year. They need learning. Mr. Cole, not just how to brand a cow. He had a plan, a quiet, careful plan. He had heard that the town teacher, Miss Hart, was different. She did not just drill facts. She sparked curiosity. He had planned to wait until the school was completely finished. He would approach her then, offer her a position here, with a good salary and complete freedom to teach as she saw fit. A place away from the prying eyes of the school board and the suffocating judgment of the town. He had been biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment. He heard the crunch of boots on the dry leaves and turned. It was Maria, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, her face etched with worry. She had walked all the way from the main ranch house. "Mr. Cole," she said, her breath coming in short puffs. "I came as fast as I could. I heard it at the mercantile. She is gone." Cole said nothing. He set the heavy panes of glass down gently against the cabin wall. "Miss Hart," Maria pressed, her voice urgent. "The teacher, she was on the train that just left. She is gone for good. Everyone is talking. Because of the banker's son, they say she had no choice." The words struck Cole with the force of a physical blow. Gone. He looked at the schoolhouse, at the neat rows of logs and the empty windows. He saw the beautiful, useless blackboard. He saw the faces of Manuel and Sophia and a half-dozen other children, their potential suddenly seeming as distant as the peaks of the mountains. The entire structure, his carefully laid plan, the very reason for these logs and nails and glass, had been built around one essential, irreplaceable part, and he had just let it ride out of town on a 6:47 train. He had miscalculated. He had waited, hiding in the shadows with his quiet atonement, while the one person who could give it life was being driven away in plain sight. The last echoes of the train whistle faded into the vast, indifferent silence of the mountains. He looked at the schoolhouse, a monument to his folly. Then he looked down the trail, in the direction of the town and the iron tracks that led west. A cold, hard resolve settled in his chest. He turned to his housekeeper. "Maria, go back to the ranch. Tell the men to be on alert. I have business in town." Without another word, he strode back to where he had tied his horse. He swung himself into the saddle, his movements economical and precise. He had to ride, not to the station that was now empty, but along the tracks. A train was fast, but it had to follow the pass. A man on a good horse, who knew the land, could take the shortcuts. He did not know what he would say. He did not know what he could possibly offer. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he could not let her go. Meanwhile, on the train, Eliza Hart watched the rugged landscape of Colorado slide past her window. The town of Sagebrush Bend was already a memory, a smudge of gray and brown in the distance. She leaned her head against the cool glass, a single tear tracing a clean path through the dust on the pane. She took a deep breath, trying to feel the release, the freedom she had paid for with her last dollar and all of her pride. She told herself she was not running away. She was running towards something, a future, a clean slate, like the one that had hung in her schoolhouse, waiting for the day's lessons. A sudden, sharp whistle from the engine up ahead made her jump. The train was slowing, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels turning into a grating screech. She sat up, peering out the window. There was nothing ahead but an endless expanse of rock and sagebrush, the tracks stretching into the horizon. Then she saw it. A rider, a single horseman, far up the tracks, holding one hand up in the universal signal to stop. The train shuddered to a halt, hissing steam like an angry beast. Eliza's heart began to pound, a frantic, trapped bird against her ribs. She had no idea who the man was, or why he had stopped a train in the middle of nowhere. All she knew was that her escape, her carefully planned freedom, had just come to a grinding, inexplicable stop. The conductor began to move through the car, his face a mask of irritation. Eliza stared out the window at the lone figure on horseback, a silhouette against the vast, empty sky, and a new, unfamiliar feeling began to bloom in her chest. It was not fear. It was a terrifying, unwelcome flicker of hope. The conductor, a stout man with a face like a weathered apple, grumbled his way down the aisle. Passengers craned their necks, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. Outside, the world was nothing but sky and rock. A bandit, perhaps, or a damaged rail. Eliza's mind raced through the possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. The door at the end of the car opened, and the man who had stopped the train stepped inside. He was tall, dressed in practical, well-worn range clothes. Dust covered him from the brim of his hat to the heels of his boots. He removed his hat as he entered, revealing dark hair and a face that was all sharp angles and quiet intensity. Eliza recognized him then, not by name, but as a presence she had noted in town. Cole Ransom, the man from the remote ranch, the one who kept to himself, the subject of so much speculation. His eyes scanned the car, passed over her, then returned, locking with hers. There was no flicker of recognition, just a steady, unnerving focus. He walked toward her, his spurs making a soft, rhythmic clinking on the floorboards, a sound utterly out of place in the confined space of the rail car. The other passengers fell silent, watching the small drama unfold. He stopped beside her seat. He smelled of leather, horses, and the cold mountain air. "Miss Hart," he said. His voice was low and calm, yet it carried clearly in the sudden hush. Eliza could only nod, her throat tight. "I apologize for this," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I need to speak with you." The conductor bustled forward. "Now see here, mister. You cannot just stop a Union Pacific train because you need a word with someone. We are on a schedule." Cole did not look at the conductor. His attention remained fixed on Eliza. "This will not take long," he said. "To her," he added. "Would you be willing to step outside? Step outside into the middle of the wilderness with this stranger panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her shock. She was a woman alone. This was reckless. It was unthinkable. But then she looked into his eyes again. There was no threat there. There was only a profound, inexplicable urgency. It was the same look she sometimes saw in a student who was on the very brink of understanding a difficult problem. I do not understand," she managed to say. "I know," he said. "That is why I'm asking for a chance to explain. Please." The word hung in the air between them. Please. It was not a command. It was not a demand. It was a simple, stark request. It was more respect than she had been shown in 2 weeks. She did not know why she did it. Perhaps it was a rebellion against the suffocating certainty of her escape. Perhaps it was the sheer force of his will. She stood up, her legs unsteady. "This is highly irregular," the conductor sputtered. Cole finally turned his head. He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He extracted several bills and pressed them into the conductor's hand. For the delay, he said, "Now, if you would be so kind as to reverse the engine and take us back to the Sagebrush Bend station." A collective gasp went through the car. Even the conductor was stunned into silence. Back to the station, the idea was preposterous, but the money in his hand was real. and the look on Cole Ransom's face suggested he was not a man accustomed to being refused. With a bewildered shake of his head, the conductor turned and retreated toward the engine. Cole gestured for Eliza to precede him. She walked down the aisle, feeling the weight of every stare, her cheeks burning with a fresh, hot wave of humiliation. She had just been made a public spectacle for the second time in as many weeks. The train began to move, not forward, but backward, the wheels screeching in protest. It was a slow, agonizing retreat. Eliza stood on the small platform between the cars, her hands gripping the cold iron railing. Cole stood a respectful distance away, his expression unreadable. She was going back to the pointing fingers, the whispers, the pity, back to the prison from which she had just escaped. It felt like an eternity before the familiar, rough-hewn buildings of the station slid back into view. The few people who had been lingering on the platform stared, their mouths agape, as the train they had just seen depart reappeared, backing slowly into its former position. Eliza stepped down onto the wooden planks, her valise feeling impossibly heavy in her hand. Cole followed, his horse, which had been trotting patiently behind the train, coming to a halt beside him. The steam from the engine swirled around them, obscuring them one moment, revealing them the next, like actors in a poorly staged play. The conductor leaned out. "All aboard that's coming aboard," he shouted, his voice thick with exasperation. The great bell on the engine began to clang. This was it, her last chance. The train was leaving again. The future she had chosen was about to pull away. She could still get on. She could still run. She took a half step toward the car. Cole's hand closed gently around her wrist. It was not a grip to restrain her. It was a touch to ground her. It was warm and firm. A startling point of contact in the cold, confusing air. The train gave a powerful lurch, the couplings groaning as it began its journey west once more. The sound of the steam and the grinding wheels was deafening. Through the noise, Cole leaned closer, his voice meant for her alone. "Stay with me," he whispered. The words were almost lost, but she heard them. They were not a plea for love. They were not a declaration. They were a simple, impossible request. The last car slid past them, and then it was gone. The rhythmic clatter of its wheels receded down the track, growing fainter and fainter until it was swallowed by the immense silence of the land. The train was gone. Her future was gone with it. The silence that descended on the platform was heavier than any sound. It was thick with the unasked questions of the half-dozen onlookers who were now openly staring. Eliza pulled her wrist free, the warmth of his touch lingering on her skin. She turned to face him, her composure finally shattering, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and bewilderment. "What have you done?" she demanded. "Who do you think you are to do such a thing? You have no right." "You are correct," he said, his voice even. "I have no right, only a reason. And what possible reason could you have for humiliating me in front of this entire town all over again?" Cole's eyes held hers. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something beyond that calm intensity. It was a deep, quiet regret. "My reason has nothing to do with your humiliation, Miss Hart, and everything to do with my own foolishness. I waited too long." He did not mention Thomas Whitfield. He did not speak of the gossip or her ruined reputation. He seemed oblivious to the stares of the small crowd. He looked at her not as a fallen woman, but as a person whose departure was a grave mistake, a problem that needed to be solved. "I do not understand any of this," she said, her voice dropping to a low, frustrated whisper. "You have made me miss my train, my escape." "Some things are worth missing a train for," he replied. He gestured toward the town, toward the main street that was slowly coming to life under the morning sun. "Give me 1 hour of your time. That is all I ask. Let me buy you breakfast at the Grand Hotel. Let me explain." The idea of sitting in the Grand Hotel with this man, the object of every curious eye in Sagebrush Bend, was mortifying. And yet, what choice did she have? The next train west was not until evening. She was stranded, a prisoner of this man's bizarre impulse. Why, she asked again, her voice pleading now. Just tell me why. He took a slow breath. He was not a man who hurried his words. Because there are children up at Ransom Creek, and on the neighboring spreads. Good children, smart children, and they have no school. They have no teacher. They have no one to show them how to read a book or write their own names. He paused, and his gaze was so direct it felt as if he could see right through her defenses. I was building them a schoolhouse, but a school is just a building. It is nothing without a teacher. I heard you were the best. I came to town to ask you to consider the position. I was a day too late. Eliza stared at him, speechless. This was not what she had expected. A rescue, a romantic intervention. No. This was a job offer. The most dramatic, ill-timed, and public job offer in the history of the world. He was not trying to save her soul. He was trying to fill a vacancy. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it was so unexpected that a hysterical laugh almost escaped her. She thought of her classroom in town, the one she had so lovingly tended. She thought of the faces of her students, the frustration and the sudden, brilliant flashes of understanding. He was right. A school was just a building. She was a teacher. It was not just what she did, it was who she was. And for 2 weeks, she had let the town of Sagebrush Bend take that away from her. 1 hour, he said again, his voice softer now. Just breakfast. You can listen to what I have to say. If at the end of it, you still wish to go to San Francisco, I will personally buy your ticket for the evening train, and I will trouble you no more. It was a fair offer, a decent one, and her pride, which had been so battered and bruised, began to stir. To leave now would be to flee, to stay, to listen, to make a decision based on facts and not on fear. That was something different. That was an act of self-possession. She looked from Cole Ransom's earnest face to the town that had judged her so harshly. For the first time, she did not see it as a place to escape. She saw it as a place to be. "All right, Mr. Ransom," she said, her voice clear and steady for the first time that morning. She lifted her chin. 1 hour, you may buy me breakfast. A small, almost imperceptible measure of relief eased the tension in his face. He nodded once, a gesture of respect. He picked up her valise, his hand brushing against hers as he took it. Then, he turned and began to walk toward the main street. After a moment's hesitation, Eliza Hart fell into step beside him, and together, they walked directly into the heart of the town that was already whispering their names. The Grand Hotel was not grand. It was a 2-story wooden box with a sagging porch and a sign whose yellow paint was flaking off in sad, curling strips. But it was the only hotel in Sagebrush Bend, and its dining room served as the town's nerve center, a place where business was conducted, reputations were made, and, more often than not, dismantled over weak coffee and lukewarm stew. Walking through the door with Cole Ransom was like setting a match to a dry field of grass. A low murmur of conversation was filling the room, the clatter of forks on plates providing a steady rhythm. The moment they stepped over the threshold, a profound silence fell. Every head turned. Every fork paused midway to a mouth. Eliza felt the heat of their collective gaze like a physical force, a brand against her cheek. She had a wild urge to turn and run, to flee back to the anonymity of the train station. But Cole's presence beside her was a steady, unmovable fact. He held the door for her, his expression as impassive as if he were walking into an empty room. He led her to a small, secluded table in the far corner, a small act of mercy that offered the illusion of privacy. He pulled out a chair for her, a gesture of old-world courtesy that seemed strangely out of place in this rough-hewn environment. As she sat, she could feel the whispers starting up again, a low, sibilant hiss that coiled around the room like smoke. She smoothed the fabric of her dress over her knees, keeping her eyes downcast, studying the pattern of scratches on the scarred wooden tabletop. The tablecloth was a thin, graying linen with a faint stain near her elbow. The water glass had a small chip on the rim. Everything in the room seemed tired and worn, including the people in it. A young woman approached their table, a tin coffee pot in one hand and a notepad in the other. It was Betty Cho, whose father ran the laundry. Betty had been in Eliza's first class of students 2 years ago. Her eyes, normally bright and curious, were now wide with a kind of terrified awe. "Miss Hart," Betty whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mr. Ransom." "Morning, Betty," Cole said calmly. "We will have some coffee, and 2 plates of biscuits and bacon." Betty nodded, her gaze darting from Eliza to Cole and back again. She started to pour the coffee, her hand trembling slightly. As she reached for Eliza's cup, a silver spoon that had been resting on the saucer clattered to the floor. The sound was unnaturally loud in the charged silence. Betty jumped as if she had been shot, her face flooding with color. "Oh, my goodness, I am so sorry, Miss Hart," she stammered, fumbling to pick it up. "It is quite all right. Betty," Eliza said, forcing a small, tight smile. "The incident, so trivial, felt monumental. It was the physical manifestation of the town's shock. Betty Cho had dropped a spoon because Eliza Hart was having breakfast with Cole Ransom. The story would be all over town before their coffee was cold." Betty fled toward the kitchen, and they were alone again in their corner. The coffee was thin and bitter, a taste that perfectly matched Eliza's mood. She took a sip, the hot liquid doing little to warm the chill inside her. "I apologize for this," Cole said, his voice low. "I did not fully consider how it would look." "You did not consider how it would look?" Eliza asked, her own voice a quiet, incredulous whisper. "Mr. Ransom, you stopped a federal train. I believe we are long past the point of considering appearances." A faint smile touched the corners of his mouth, a brief and surprising flicker of warmth. "A fair point. I suppose I am not a man who gives much thought to appearances." "That must be a luxury," she said, the bitterness of the coffee seeping into her words. For a woman, for a school teacher in a town like this, appearances were everything. They were currency, armor, and, in her case, a cage. He did not take offense. He simply watched her over the rim of his chipped coffee cup. Perhaps, or perhaps it is just a different set of priorities. He set his cup down. "You asked me why I brought you back. I told you about the children. Let me tell you their names." Eliza said nothing, so he continued. "There is a boy named Manuel Torres. He is 10 years old. His mother, Maria, is my housekeeper. The boy can take apart a clock and put it back together. He can tell you when a horse is about to throw a shoe just by the way it walks. But if you put a newspaper in front of him, the letters are just black marks on the page. He wants to read. I see it in his eyes. He is ashamed that he cannot—" Eliza's hands, which had been clenched in her lap, relaxed slightly. She knew that look, the shame of a bright mind trapped behind a wall of illiteracy. "There is a girl," Cole went on. "Sophia Rossi. Her father is a tenant farmer on the spread north of mine. She is 8. She asks questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where do the stars go in the daytime? Her mind is afire. Miss Hart, a fire that needs fuel. Right now, all it has is dust and wind." He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower, drawing her into the circle of his confidence. "There is another boy, a little fellow named Thomas, just 6 years old. He follows me around the ranch like a shadow. Yesterday he asked me to read him a story from a book I have. It was about a knight and a dragon. He sat there, his eyes as big as saucers, like he was drinking the words. When I finished, he touched the book with one finger, very gently, as if it were magic." Cole paused, his gaze steady and direct. "It is magic, is it not? Miss Hart, the world that is locked away in a book. I can give these children a roof and 4 walls. I can give them a stove to keep them warm, but I cannot give them the key to unlock that world. Only a teacher can do that." The image of the small boy touching the book, the fire in the little girl's mind, the shame in the older boy's eyes. They were potent. They were the very things that had drawn her to teaching in the first place. She felt a familiar ache in her chest, the pull of a duty she thought she had left behind. Still, her practical nature, sharpened by her recent ordeal, asserted itself. "Why you, Mr. Ransom?" she asked, her voice regaining its strength. "The town whispers about you. They say you have money from questionable sources. Why this sudden interest in philanthropy?" He did not flinch from the directness of the question. He met her gaze without a hint of defensiveness. "The town can whisper what it likes. The money is my own, and it is honestly earned. As for my interest, let us just say that I believe every child deserves a chance, a better chance than some are given." There was a shadow in his eyes then, a hint of a history she could not read. "Why not send them to the school here? In town," she pressed. "It is a 10-mile ride for most of them, too far for the younger ones, especially in winter. And some of their parents, they do not feel welcome in Sagebrush Bend. They feel judged, just as you have been judged." That struck home. She knew that feeling all too well. Betty returned with their food, placing 2 plates on the table with exaggerated care. A generous portion of crisp bacon sat beside 3 fluffy, golden brown buttermilk biscuits, a small dollop of apple butter melting on top of each. The simple, honest meal was a stark contrast to the complexity of their conversation. The smell alone was comforting. It was the smell of a kitchen, of home, of simple decency. For a few moments, they ate in silence. The murmuring in the dining room continued around them, a constant, buzzing backdrop to their private truce. Eliza found she was hungry. The biscuit was warm and light, the butter sweet. It was a small, nourishing kindness in a world that had offered her very little of late. "You would be in complete charge," Cole said, breaking the silence. "You would choose the books, set the curriculum. Your authority in the classroom would be absolute, and your salary would be 1/3 more than what the town paid you." It was a tempting offer. More than tempting. It was a lifeline, but it was a lifeline thrown by a man she did not know, a man the whole town distrusted. To accept would be to trade one kind of gossip for another, perhaps even more scandalous. The jilted schoolteacher running off to the mysterious rancher's private school. She could already hear the stories. "My reputation, Mr. Ransom," she said quietly, setting down her fork. "What is left of it? If I were to accept a position from you, a single man, and move out to your property—" "You would not be on my property," he interrupted gently. "The school is on its own plot, a mile from the main house. And I have already considered the question of propriety. I was planning to build a small cottage for the teacher, separate from everything else, a place of your own, and my housekeeper, Maria, is always at the ranch. You would not be alone." He had thought of everything, every practical objection she raised. He had a calm, logical answer. He was not making a romantic appeal. He was making a professional one. He was not offering her a place in his life. He was offering her a place to rebuild her own. "Words are easy, Mr. Ransom," she said, her skepticism a final, stubborn shield. "You paint a very compelling picture, but a picture is all it is." He nodded, as if he had expected this. "You are right. Truth needs proof, not promises." He looked at her, his expression serious. "My hour is almost up, but I am asking for more of your time. I am asking you to give me until this afternoon. Ride out to Ransom Creek with me. Let me show you what I have built. See the place for yourself. Meet Maria. Meet some of the children. If, after you have seen it with your own eyes, you still believe San Francisco is your best choice, I will not say another word." There it was. The ultimate challenge, to see the truth for herself. The risk was enormous. To be seen riding out of town with Cole Ransom would be a definitive act, a crossing of a social Rubicon from which there would be no return. But the potential reward, it was not just a job. It was a chance to do the work she loved, to be valued for her mind and her skill, not judged for her personal life. It was a chance to matter again. She looked at him, truly looked at him. For the first time, he was not handsome in the way Thomas Whitfield was handsome. His face was too weathered, too serious, but there was a strength in it, a deep, quiet integrity that she had not seen in any other man in this town. He had seen her at her lowest point, a woman fleeing in disgrace, and he had not offered her pity. He had offered her a purpose. She made her decision. "Very well, Mr. Ransom," she said, her voice firm. "I will ride out to your ranch and see this schoolhouse." She held up a hand, but on one condition. This is to be understood as a purely professional visit, a job interview, if you will. I will require that your housekeeper is present at all times. Propriety must be strictly observed. He gave a slow, formal nod. "Of course. Miss Hart, your terms are accepted." He signaled for Betty, who scurried over. Cole paid for the meal, leaving a generous tip that made the young woman's eyes widen once more. Then they stood. The room, which had maintained its low hum, fell silent again. Every eye was on them. Eliza took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and prepared for the final, most difficult part of the morning. Cole retrieved her valise from where he had set it by the door. He held the door open for her once again. As she stepped out onto the porch, into the bright, unforgiving morning sun, she felt the whispers from the dining room rise up behind her like a physical wave. She did not look back. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, on the dusty main street of Sagebrush Bend. She had entered the hotel, a fugitive. She was leaving it an applicant, walking into a storm of rumors with a man she barely knew, toward a future she could not possibly imagine. The ride to Ransom Creek was a silent one, but the silence was of a different quality than the one that had filled the hotel dining room. That silence had been heavy with judgment. This was filled with the sounds of the world going about its business, the steady rhythm of 4 hoofbeats on the packed earth, the whisper of the wind through the tall prairie grass, the cry of a hawk circling high overhead. Cole Ransom rode his own horse, a powerful roan, and led a gentle mare for Eliza. He had retrieved it from the livery, a small consideration that she appreciated more than words could say. He did not press her with conversation. He simply rode, pointing out landmarks with a brief word or a gesture of his hand. The twin peaks that marked the northern edge of his property, the line of cottonwood trees that followed the path of the creek, its water running clear and cold over a bed of smooth stones. As they left the dusty outskirts of Sagebrush Bend behind, the landscape began to change. The gray-brown plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pine. Herds of cattle, bearing the distinctive R brand, grazed peacefully on the slopes, lifting their heads to watch them pass with placid curiosity. The air grew cleaner, sharper, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. It was a world away from the grit and gossip of the town. Eliza watched him as he rode. He sat his horse with an easy, natural grace, a man completely at home in this rugged country. He was not what she had expected. The town's rumors had painted him as a dark, brooding figure, a man with a dangerous past. But the man beside her was quiet, observant, and possessed of a surprising thoughtfulness. He had not only considered her professional needs, but had also anticipated her need for a decent horse and her desire for quiet. After nearly an hour, he reined in his horse on a low rise. "There," he said, his voice a low rumble. Below them, nestled in a wide, sheltered valley, was the Ransom Creek Ranch. It was not a grand estate, but a collection of sturdy, practical buildings, a long, low ranch house built of dark timber, with a wide porch running its length, a large, well-kept barn and a series of corrals. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, a thin gray ribbon against the brilliant blue sky. Everything about the place spoke of order, hard work, and a deep-seated permanence. As they rode down into the valley, a woman came out onto the porch of the main house. She was of middle age, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and a kind, weathered face. She wiped her hands on her apron as she watched them approach. "This is Maria Torres," Cole said as they dismounted. "Maria, this is Miss Eliza Hart." "Miss Hart?" Maria said. her voice warm and her gaze direct. There was a keen intelligence in her eyes, and a hint of a protective nature as she looked from Cole to Eliza. "We are pleased to have you visit us. I will put some coffee on." "Thank you, Maria," Cole said. He turned to Eliza. "The schoolhouse is this way." He did not take her to the main house. Instead, he led her along a well-worn path that followed the gentle curve of the creek. The sound of the water was a constant, soothing murmur. After a few hundred yards, they came around a stand of golden-leafed aspen trees, and Eliza stopped, her breath catching in her throat. It was perfect. It was not a converted barn or a rough shed. It was a proper schoolhouse, newly built, the raw pine logs smelling clean and sharp in the autumn air. It had a real porch, a shingled roof, and 3 large glass windows on each side, designed to let in the maximum amount of light. It was a building made with care, with purpose, with hope. Cole watched her, his expression unreadable, as she slowly approached it, her hand reaching out as if to touch a mirage. She stepped up onto the porch, the new board solid beneath her feet. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was a single, spacious room, and it was everything a teacher could dream of. 6 small desks, built for children of varying sizes, were arranged in neat rows. A large pot-bellied stove stood in one corner, its pipe clean and new. Along one wall was a long shelf, and on it were books. Not old, cast-off readers, but new-looking primers, geographies, and a handsome set of McGuffey's readers. There was a detailed map of the United States on one wall and another of the Colorado Territory. And on the front wall, dominating the room, was the most beautiful blackboard she had ever seen. It was a vast, smooth expanse of dark slate, unmarred by a single chalk mark, a field of pure, limitless potential. She walked to the front of the room and ran her fingers over its cool, smooth surface. This was not just a building. It was a promise. It was a testament to a belief in the future, a belief in the power of knowledge. A place like this was not built on a whim. "You built this," she said, her voice soft with awe. She turned to face him. He was standing in the doorway, his tall frame filling the opening. "I had help," he said, "but yes, I built it." It is wonderful." Before he could reply, the sound of running feet and children's laughter filled the air. A moment later, 3 small figures burst around the side of the building. Mr. Cole, a small boy with dark, tangled hair shouted, running straight for him. Cole's serious expression dissolved, replaced by a genuine, unguarded warmth that transformed his face. He knelt and caught the small boy, swinging him up into his arms. "And how is my shadow today?" he asked with a smile. "We saw you riding in," the boy said, beaming. "Maria said you were back." A slightly older boy and a young girl with 2 long, dark braids hung back, watching Eliza with shy, curious eyes. Maria appeared behind them, her expression fond. "These are my rascals," she said to Eliza. "This one," she said, ruffling the hair of the older boy, "is my Manuel. And this is Sophia Rossi, and the little monkey in Mr. Cole's arms is Thomas." The names, the very children he had described to her at the hotel. They were real. "It is a pleasure to meet you all," Eliza said, her voice a little shaky. Sophia, the girl with the braids, took a hesitant step forward. "Are you a new visitor?" she asked, her voice clear and precise. "In a way," Eliza said, a smile touching her lips for the first time. "Mr. Cole is showing me his new schoolhouse. It is very fine." Manuel, the older boy, shuffled his feet. His eyes were fixed on the bookshelf. "Are those all new books?" he asked, his voice low. "They are," Cole said, setting young Thomas down. "And they are all for you, if you want them." Manuel's eyes widened, but he said nothing, a flush of pleasure and embarrassment coloring his cheeks. Eliza felt a familiar stirring within her. the instinct of a teacher awakening from a long, unhappy slumber. She saw the hunger for knowledge in Manuel's eyes, the bright curiosity in Sophia's, the simple, trusting eagerness of little Thomas. She walked over to the shelf and picked up a simple primer. She then moved to the front of the room, to the beautiful, untouched blackboard. She found a small box of new chalk sticks on the ledge. She picked one up. The feel of the smooth, cool cylinder in her fingers was like a homecoming. It felt right. More right than anything had felt in weeks. Without a conscious decision, she turned to the board. "Who can tell me what this letter is?" she asked, her voice taking on the clear, gentle authority of the classroom. She drew a large, perfect letter A on the slate. Little Thomas's hand shot up. He shouted proudly. "That is right, Thomas. Very good," Eliza said, her smile genuine and warm now. "And what sound does it make?" Sophia spoke up. "It makes the ah sound," she said, "like in apple." Exactly. Sophia Eliza drew 2 P's, then an L, then an E. As she wrote, she felt a powerful sense of clarity, of rightness. The whispers of the town, the sting of her humiliation, the long, lonely journey to San Francisco, it all faded away, replaced by the simple, profound joy of this moment. This was her purpose. This was her place. She was a teacher, and these were her students. She drew a quick, simple sketch of an apple beside the word. This is the word apple. Can anyone try to sound it out? She looked at Manuel. He was staring at the board, his brow furrowed in concentration, his lips moving silently. She saw the struggle, the shame he fought to hide, and the fierce desire to understand. "Go on, Manuel," she said softly, her voice full of encouragement. "You can do it. Start with the first letter." He took a deep breath. "Ah," he said, his voice hesitant. He looked at the next letters. "P, P." He stumbled, looking down at his feet. "You are so close," Eliza said, her heart aching for him. She pointed to the 2 P's. "When you see 2 letters together like this, they just make one sound. So it is, Appa." He looked back at the board, his dark eyes intense. "Ah, P-L," he said, sounding out the last part. He put it all together, his voice gaining a sliver of confidence. "Apple." He looked up at her, his face suddenly illuminated by a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Apple," he said again, this time not as a question, but as a statement, a discovery. In that moment, watching the light dawn in that boy's eyes, Eliza Hart knew she was not going to San Francisco. She belonged here, in this room, with this blackboard and these children. The knowledge settled over her not with a sense of resignation, but with a profound and joyful sense of peace. She had been offered a chance not just to run a school, but to build one, to write her own story on this clean, blank slate. After the impromptu lesson, Maria shooed the children outside to play by the creek. Cole, who had been leaning silently against the doorframe, watching the entire scene unfold, straightened up. "It seems I have my answer," he said, his voice quiet. Eliza turned from the blackboard, a piece of chalk still in her hand. "You have a beautiful school, Mr. Ransom, and some very bright potential students. All it needs is a teacher," he said. He took a step into the room. "Miss Hart, I am formally offering you the position of head teacher of the Ransom Creek School, the salary I mentioned, full authority over the curriculum, and a cottage to be built for you on that rise over there." He gestured through the window. "Where you can have your privacy. The position is yours, if you will take it." It was not a plea. It was not a romantic gesture. It was a straightforward, respectful business proposition. It was an invitation to be a partner in a vital enterprise. "Before I give you my answer," she said, her voice steady, "I have something I must do. I will not sneak away from my responsibilities in town. I must return to Sagebrush Bend. Speak to Mr. Patterson and the school board, and tender my resignation in a proper fashion. I must say goodbye to my students there. I will not have it said that I abandoned them." Cole nodded, a look of deep respect in his eyes. I would expect nothing less from you. Then, Mr. Ransom, she said, setting the piece of chalk down on the ledge, I believe you will have your teacher later. They sat on the wide porch of the main ranch house. Maria served them a simple lunch of thick beef stew and fresh, crusty bread. The children played nearby, their laughter carrying on the breeze. It was a world of simple, honest warmth, a community in miniature. It was a family. Eliza felt a sense of peace she had not known was possible. She had arrived at Ransom Creek that morning a woman adrift, her identity in tatters. She would leave it a woman with a purpose, with a future she could build with her own 2 hands, with a blackboard and a piece of chalk. She still had to face the town. She still had to walk back through the fire of their gossip. But this time, she would not be running from something. She would be walking towards something, and that made all the difference in the world. The ride back to Sagebrush Bend was charged with a new kind of tension. The morning's silence had been one of discovery. This afternoon's was one of anticipation. Eliza felt as though she were riding toward a battle, but for the first time, she felt armed and ready. Cole Ransom rode beside her, his presence a quiet, reassuring bulwark against the storm she knew was coming. When they reached the edge of town, he reined in his horse. I will leave you here, Miss Hart, he said. Walking in with me will only add fuel to the fire. It was a thoughtful gesture, but Eliza shook her head. The time for hiding was over. No, Mr. Ransom, we will ride in together. Let them see, let them talk. I have nothing to be ashamed of. A look of profound respect settled in his eyes. He gave a single, slow nod, and they rode down the main street side by side. The effect was instantaneous. Curtains twitched in windows. Men stopped their conversations on the boardwalk to stare. It was a bolder statement than anything she could have said. It was an announcement that she was no longer bound by their opinions. At the boarding house, he dismounted and helped her down, handing her the small valise. I will await your word, he said, his voice low and formal. He touched the brim of his hat, swung back into his saddle, and rode away without a backward glance. Eliza turned and faced the door to the boarding house. She took a deep breath and went inside. Mrs. Henderson was waiting in the parlor, her knitting lying forgotten in her lap, her face a mask of anxious confusion. Eliza, good heavens! Child, the whole town is in an uproar. They said you came back. On the train. With him. I did, Mrs. Henderson, Eliza said, setting her bag down. She was tired, but her voice was steady. But why your ticket to San Francisco? I have changed my plans, Eliza said simply. Mr. Ransom has offered me a position as the teacher for the children on the outlying ranches. I have accepted. The landlady's jaw dropped. She stared at Eliza as if she had announced she was taking up a career as a circus performer. Teaching for him out at that place, Eliza, do you know what they say about that man? I know what I have seen, Eliza replied calmly. I have seen a well-built schoolhouse, a shelf full of new books, and children who are desperate to learn. What the town says is no longer my primary concern. Mrs. Henderson studied her for a long moment. She saw not the broken, humiliated girl who had crept out before dawn, but a woman whose spine had been forged from new steel. The anxiety on her face slowly softened, replaced by a look of shrewd, cautious approval. Well, she said, finally picking up her knitting needles again, you have certainly set the cat among the pigeons. Thomas Whitfield was in the hotel dining room when you walked in. They say his face turned the color of buttermilk. A small, satisfied smile played on her lips. Good. The boy needed a lesson in humility. She looked up at Eliza. You will need your strength for what comes next. Dear girl, I will bring you up some supper on a tray. It was not a question, but a statement of alliance. In that moment, Eliza knew she had found her first and most important supporter. The next day, Eliza walked to Patterson's Mercantile. The bell above the door chimed. And Mr. Patterson looked up from his ledger, his expression sour. He had clearly heard the news. "Miss Hart," he said, his tone dripping with disapproval. "I confess I am surprised to see you. I assumed you were halfway to California by now." "My plans have changed. Mr. Patterson," she said, her voice clear and businesslike. She walked directly to the counter. "I am here to tender my resignation as the teacher for the town of Sagebrush Bend, effective immediately." Patterson blinked, taken aback by her directness. He had expected tears, pleas, or at the very least, a guilty explanation. Resignation. "That is not necessary. The board has already voted to terminate your contract under the circumstances." "Then I am here to make it official," Eliza said, refusing to be baited. "Furthermore, I wish to arrange a time this afternoon to gather my personal belongings from the schoolhouse and to say a proper goodbye to the children." "I do not think that is a good idea," he said, puffing out his chest. "Your influence is no longer appropriate." "My influence," Eliza said, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity, "has been to teach the children of this town how to read, write, and do their sums. I have done nothing to be ashamed of, and I will not be denied the chance to say goodbye to my students. I will be at the schoolhouse at 2:00. She turned to leave. "And one more thing, Miss Hart," Patterson called after her, his voice laced with spite. "Do not think you will ever teach in a respectable school in this territory again. I will see to it that your association with a man like Ransom follows you everywhere." Eliza paused at the door and looked back at him, a calm, pitying smile on her face. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Patterson, but I already have a respectable school. I am going to a place where the children are valued more than gossip." She walked out, leaving him sputtering behind the counter. At 2:00, she walked into her old classroom. The children were already there, their faces a mixture of confusion and excitement at the unexpected break in their routine. When they saw her, a hush fell over the room. Little Sarah Gable, whose mother was one of the town's most active gossips, burst into tears. Eliza's heart ached. She walked to the front of the room, to the familiar desk and the scuffed, well-used blackboard. "Good afternoon, children," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Miss Hart, are you really leaving?" asked a boy named Peter Miller, son of the town blacksmith. "I am," she said, "but I could not leave without seeing all of you one last time." She looked at their faces, these children she had come to care for so deeply. She saw their potential, their goodness, and it gave her strength. "Sometimes in life," she began, choosing her words with care, "we are given a new path to walk. I have been given the chance to go and teach children who do not have a school at all. They live far out of town and have no one to teach them how to read the wonderful stories we have read together, or how to write letters to their family." She looked directly at the tear-streaked face of young Sarah. "I want you all to know something very important. I am not running away from you, or from Sagebrush Bend. I am running toward a place where I am needed more. Do you understand?" The children nodded, their eyes wide. They did not understand the adult complexities, the shame and the judgment, but they understood the idea of being needed. She spent the next hour speaking to each of them individually, returning a book to one, admiring a drawing from another, giving them each a word of encouragement. It was one of the hardest hours of her life. When it was time to go, she walked out of the schoolhouse and into the harsh afternoon sun, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. Several parents were waiting outside. Mrs. Gable stood at the front, her arms crossed, her face a thundercloud. "I think you have a lot of nerve, Miss Hart, upsetting the children like this after the disgrace you have brought on this town." Before Eliza could reply, another woman stepped forward. It was Mrs. Miller, Peter's mother. She was a quiet woman, with flour on her apron and kindness in her eyes. "Leave her be." "Martha," she said, her voice surprisingly firm, "Miss Hart has been a fine teacher to my Peter. He was struggling with his letters, and she stayed after school with him twice a week, on her own time. She did not have to do that. She turned to Eliza, her expression full of a quiet, fierce gratitude. Those ranch children are lucky to have you. Miss Hart, do not you mind the talk. A few other parents murmured their agreement. It was not a landslide of support, but it was something. It was a crack in the town's wall of condemnation. As she was walking back toward the boarding house, a familiar figure blocked her path. Thomas Whitfield. He was dressed, as always, in a perfectly tailored suit, his face arranged in a mask of handsome concern. "Eliza," he said, his voice smooth and condescending, "I heard the most astonishing rumor, that you had returned with that Ransom fellow. Surely you know his reputation. I was so terribly worried for you, my dear." Eliza looked at him, at the man whose weakness and vanity had caused her so much pain. A few days ago, the sight of him would have filled her with shame and anger. Now, she felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity. He was a small man, insulated by his father's money and his mother's ambition. "Thank you for your concern, Thomas," she said, her voice polite and cool, "but I am perfectly capable of making my own decisions. Now, if you will excuse me." She stepped around him and continued walking, not looking back. She could feel his stunned, indignant gaze on her back, but it had no power over her anymore. That part of her life was over. That evening, she sat in her room and wrote. She composed a formal letter of resignation to Mr. Patterson and the school board, a model of professional decorum. Then, she wrote personal, handwritten notes to the parents of each of her former students, thanking them for the privilege of teaching their children and wishing them well. It was an act of closure, of leaving with her dignity intact. When she had finished, she felt a profound sense of peace. The battles of the day were over. Now, the work could begin. She took out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote a short, simple note. She sealed it in an envelope and took it downstairs. She asked the landlady's son to take it to the livery stable, with instructions to have it delivered to Ransom Creek. The note was addressed to Mr. Cole Ransom. It said, "Mr. Ransom, my affairs in town are now in order. I will be ready to discuss the curriculum and my new duties on Friday evening, if that is convenient. You may call on me here at 7 o'clock. Sincerely, Eliza Hart." She went back to her room and stood by the window, looking out at the lights of Sagebrush Bend. The town had not changed. It was still a place of harsh judgments and narrow minds. But she had changed. It was no longer her cage. It was simply the place where she lived, a backdrop to the new life she was about to build. One lesson, one child, one day at a time. The annual harvest dance was not a grand affair. It was held in the town's meeting hall, which doubled as a church on Sundays, a long, plain room that smelled faintly of hymn books and beeswax. For this one night a year, it was transformed. Paper lanterns, painted by the school children in shades of orange and yellow, hung from the rafters, casting a soft, warm glow. Corn stalks and pumpkins lined the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of baked apples, cinnamon, and strong coffee brewing on a stove in the back. A trio of local musicians, a fiddle, a guitar, and a banjo sawed away at a lively reel, and the rhythmic scrape and stomp of dancing boots echoed off the pine floorboards. Eliza had debated for 2 days whether she should attend. To stay away would be to concede defeat, to let the gossips believe they had successfully driven her into hiding. To go would be to walk willingly into the lion's den, to face the whispers and the stares head on. Mrs. Henderson had settled the matter for her. "You have a new dress, you have a new job, and you have your chin held higher than I have ever seen it," the landlady had declared. "You will go to that dance and let them see that Eliza Hart is not a woman to be trifled with." And so she went. She wore a simple dress of dark blue calico, a color that brought out the blue in her eyes. She did not wear it to attract attention, but to feel like herself. As she stepped through the open doorway, the music seemed to falter for a beat. The hum of conversation dropped by a noticeable degree. She felt dozens of eyes turned toward her, a familiar, prickling heat on her skin. She saw Mrs. Gable whisper something behind her hand to another woman. She saw Mr. Patterson turn his back to her with deliberate rudeness, but she also saw Mrs. Miller, the blacksmith's wife, give her a small, encouraging nod. Eliza returned the nod, took a deep breath, and walked to the refreshment table, her posture as straight and unyielding as a schoolmarm's ruler. She took a cup of cider and found a quiet spot near the wall. Content to observe, she had not come here to dance. She had come to be seen, to be present, to demonstrate, through her calm and quiet demeanor, that she would not be erased from the life of this town. She saw Thomas Whitfield holding court near the musicians. He was laughing, a loud, forced sound, but his eyes kept flicking toward her, a flicker of annoyance and wounded pride in his gaze. He was with a young woman from a neighboring town, a pretty girl with vacant eyes who seemed impressed by his every word. Eliza felt a pang, not of jealousy, but of a profound and startling relief. She had dodged a bullet, a life of being an accessory to that man's fragile ego. A half-hour passed. The music played on. Eliza politely declined 2 offers to dance from a pair of awkward young ranch hands. She was beginning to feel she had made her point and could soon make a graceful exit, when the atmosphere in the room shifted again. The front door opened, and Cole Ransom stepped inside. If her own arrival had caused a stir, his caused a tidal wave. Cole never came to town socials. He was a creature of his own remote valley, a man who seemed to have no need for the company or the approval of his neighbors. Tonight, he was not dressed in his usual dusty work clothes. He wore clean, dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a string tie. He had been to the barber. The changes were subtle, but on him, they were as dramatic as a fresh coat of paint on a weathered barn. He looked solid, serious, and utterly out of place. He did not, as the town might have expected, retreat to a dark corner. He stood for a moment in the doorway, his keen eyes scanning the room, his gaze passing over the curious faces until it found hers, and then, with a purpose that was unmistakable, he began to walk toward her. The whispers in the room died completely. The musicians, sensing a drama greater than their music, let their tune trail off into a few discordant notes. Every person in that hall turned to watch as the town's most notorious recluse walked directly toward its most recent subject of scandal. He stopped in front of her. He was taller than she remembered, and his presence seemed to create a small pocket of silence in the crowded room. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble that was meant only for her, but was heard by everyone. He gave a slight, formal bow. "Good evening." "Mr. Ransom," she replied, her own voice remarkably steady, though her heart was beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I was hoping I might find you here," he said. He glanced at the silent musicians, who were watching him with wide, expectant eyes. He gave them a slight nod. "A waltz, I believe." The fiddler, taking the cue, drew his bow across the strings, and the slow, graceful 1-2-3 rhythm of a waltz filled the hall. Cole turned back to Eliza. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked. It was a perfectly polite, perfectly proper invitation, but in that room, at that moment, it was a thunderclap. It was a declaration. He was not asking her to hide in a corner with him. He was asking her to step into the very center of the floor, into the full glare of the town's collective gaze. He was asking her to be his partner, not just in building a school, but in facing this town. She looked into his eyes. They were serious, steady, and held a question that went far beyond a simple dance. She saw in them the same quiet strength she had seen at the schoolhouse. She put her cider cup down. "I would be honored, Mr. Ransom," she said. He offered her his hand. She placed hers in it, and his fingers closed around hers, warm and firm. He led her to the center of the empty dance floor. He placed his other hand on her waist. a light, respectful touch that nonetheless sent a jolt of awareness through her. She rested her hand on his shoulder. They were close, but not too close. It was the proper, formal posture for a waltz, and yet it was the most intimate thing she had ever done. As the music swelled, he guided her into the first steps of the dance. They moved together, a solitary island in a sea of silent, staring faces. Eliza kept her eyes on his, her chin held high. She did not look at the crowd. She did not need to. She could feel their astonishment, their disapproval, their grudging, fascinated respect. They were not dancing with the fluid, practiced grace of a society couple. Their movements were simple, honest, and perfectly in time with the music and with each other. For the first time in weeks, Eliza did not feel judged. She felt seen. Cole Ransom was not looking at her as the jilted schoolteacher. He was looking at her as Eliza Hart, his partner, his equal. "I believe we have their attention," he murmured, his voice a dry, low whisper near her ear. A small smile touched her lips. "It would seem so," she whispered back. They completed one full circle of the room, then another. They did not speak again. They did not need to. The dance itself was their conversation. It was a public statement of mutual respect, a quiet defiance of every rumor and every whisper. It was the beginning of a new rhythm for their lives, a slow, steady, and deliberate turning away from the past and toward a future they would build together. When the last notes of the fiddle faded into the rafters, they stopped. The silence in the room was absolute. Cole held her hand for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then, he bowed his head slightly, and she gave a small curtsy. A few scattered, hesitant claps broke the silence, led by the blacksmith and his wife. "Thank you, Miss Hart," Cole said. "Would you care for some fresh air? It is a little warm in here."
"Yes," she said, "I think I would."
He led her from the dance floor, through the parted crowd, and out onto the small porch at the side of the hall. The night air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. The stars were a brilliant, scattered dust against a black velvet sky. The muffled sound of the party resuming behind them seemed a world away.
"You did not have to do that,"
she said, her voice quiet.
"But thank you."
"I did have to do that," he replied, his voice serious. He leaned against the porch railing, his silhouette dark against the starlight. "It was important that they see that we are partners in this school, that you have my respect, and that I will not stand by and allow your reputation to be tarnished on my account." His words warmed her more than any fire could have. He had not done it for himself. He had done it for her. "There is something else I must say to you, Miss Hart," he continued, his voice taking on a new gravity. "Something you have a right to know." She turned to face him, her heart giving a small, nervous leap. "The town whispers about me for a reason," he said. "I have a past, a difficult one. It is the reason I came here to Ransom Creek, the reason I keep to myself, before our partnership goes any further. Before you commit yourself to this school and to this life, you deserve to know the whole truth about the man you are working with." He paused, and the silence between them was filled with the chirping of crickets and the vast, quiet breathing of the night. "I will not burden you with it tonight," he said, "but I am asking you to come to the ranch tomorrow morning. Let me tell you everything, from the beginning. After you have heard it, you will be free to make your own choice. If you decide the risks are too great, I will understand. I will release you from your promise, and I will help you get to San Francisco. No questions asked." Eliza looked at his shadowed face. He was offering her an escape, a second chance at the future she had almost chosen. But it was not what she wanted. He was offering her truth, without varnish or defense. He was treating her not as a fragile woman who needed protection, but as an equal who could face the hard facts of the world and make a reasoned decision. It was the greatest compliment he could have paid her.
"I will be there,"
she said, her voice clear and sure in the cool night air. "There is one more thing," he said, and he sounded almost hesitant. "I am asking for your patience. I am asking that, for the next month, we keep our relationship strictly professional. As employer and employee, there are dangers in my past. Eliza, I will not draw you into them until they are resolved, and I will not offer you my affections until I can do so as a free man, with a clean slate. You deserve nothing less." He had used her first name, Eliza. It sounded different in his voice. Solid. Real. He was not pushing her away. He was asking her to wait. He was building a foundation of honesty and respect before allowing a single stone of romance to be laid. It was a slow, careful, and profoundly honorable way to build a future. "I understand. Cole," she said, using his name for the first time. They stood in comfortable silence for another moment. Two people on a porch, bathed in starlight, having made a promise far deeper and more binding than any whispered words of love. A promise of truth. He walked her back to the boarding house, the sound of their footsteps echoing on the empty boardwalk. At her door, he simply touched the brim of his hat. "Until tomorrow morning, Miss Hart."
"Until tomorrow, Mr. Ransom," she replied.
She went inside and up to her room, the sound of the fiddle music from the dance a faint, happy memory. She was not afraid of what he would tell her. Whatever secrets his past held, she knew she would face them with him. She had found her place, not by running away, but by standing still and allowing the right person to find her. The waltz was over, but the music was just beginning. The sky over Ransom Creek the next morning was the color of old pewter, a low, heavy blanket of cloud that had rolled in from the mountains during the night, pressing the smoke from the chimneys down toward the earth. An expectant stillness hung in the air, the kind that comes before a storm. Eliza felt it as Cole helped her down from the mare in front of the main ranch house. It was a day for secrets to be brought into the light. Maria met them at the door, her face kind but her eyes etched with a quiet gravity. She simply nodded at Eliza, a gesture of solidarity that needed no words, and then retreated toward the kitchen, leaving them to their purpose. Cole led Eliza not to the parlor, but to a room at the back of the house. It was his office, a place she had not seen before. It was a simple, masculine room, dominated by a large, flat-topped desk made of solid pine, bookshelves filled with volumes on animal husbandry, engineering, and history lined one wall. A map of the territory, crisscrossed with penciled lines, was tacked to another. The room smelled of pine, old paper, and leather. It was the heart of his quiet, ordered world. He did not ask her to sit. He walked to a large, freestanding closet in the corner, and from it, he lifted a heavy iron box, about the size of a shoebox but far more substantial. It was bound with two thick iron straps and fastened with a heavy, complex lock. He placed it on the center of the desk with a dull, resonant thud. The sound seemed to suck the air out of the room. He stood for a moment, his hands resting on the cold iron, his gaze fixed on the box as if it were a coffin. This was it, the sealed-away past he had spoken of. He finally looked up at her, his eyes dark with a pain he had carried alone for a long time. "When I was 22, he began, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "I had a partner, a man I trusted like a brother. His name was Daniel. We went into the shipping business together in Boston. We worked hard. For 5 years. We were successful. We built a fine company, respected, with a fleet of 3 ships. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. He inserted it into the lock. It turned with a loud, grating click. He lifted the heavy lid, revealing a collection of neatly stacked papers and objects. Daniel was the face of the company. Cole continued, his eyes still on the contents of the box. He was charming, well-connected. I was the one who managed the books, the cargo, the logistics. I thought we were a perfect team. I was wrong. He was in league with another man, a man with a great deal of money and no conscience at all. His name is Marcus Blackwood. He reached into the box and pulled out a sheaf of yellowed newspaper clippings. He spread them on the desk. They were from the Boston Globe. Eliza stepped closer. The headlines were stark. Whitman and Ransom Shipping declares bankruptcy. Scandal rocks waterfront. Cole Ransom accused of embezzlement, fraud. She looked up at him, her heart clenching. His name, his face in a grainy newspaper sketch, was tied to every kind of financial crime. Blackwood wanted the company, Cole said, his voice a flat, hard monotone. But he did not want to pay for it, so he and Daniel devised a plan. They started smuggling illicit goods in the holds of our ships, using forged cargo manifests. They cooked the books, creating a second set of ledgers that siphoned money into their own accounts. And when the company was hollowed out and on the brink of collapse, they made it look like I was the one who had done it all. He lifted out a heavy ledger book. He opened it, the pages brittle with age. "These are the real books," he said, pointing to a column of figures. "And these," he took out a second, thinner ledger, "are the forgeries they presented to the authorities. The handwriting is a perfect match for mine. They had been practicing for months." Eliza looked at the two sets of numbers, the truth and the lie, side by side. It was a cold, calculated act of destruction. "But surely you could have fought this," she said, her voice a whisper. "You could have proven your innocence." "I tried," he said, and for the first time a bitter edge crept into his voice. But Blackwood had the best lawyers money could buy. He had judges in his pocket. Daniel, the friend I had trusted, stood up in court and testified against me. They ruined me. They took the company, my savings, my good name, everything. He reached back into the box. His hand trembled slightly as he pulled out a small, framed photograph. It showed two young men, their arms slung around each other's shoulders, smiling into the camera. They were standing on the deck of a ship. One of them was a younger, heartbreakingly optimistic-looking Cole Ransom. The other, handsome and beaming, must have been Daniel. "I was charged," Cole said, his gaze fixed on the photograph. But Blackwood did not want a long, messy trial. He wanted me gone. He wanted me silenced. His hand went to the last item in the box. It was a folded piece of paper. He opened it and laid it on the desk. It was a doctor's report, dated a week after the newspaper articles. Eliza leaned forward and read the spidery script. Contusions to the face and torso. 3 broken ribs. A fracture of the left ulna. Probable concussion. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with horror. She looked for the scars, and now she could see a faint, silvery line near his hairline, and another along his jaw, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. "They sent men," he said, his voice barely a whisper now. "They cornered me on a dark street near the docks. They beat me and left me for dead. The message was clear. Drop the fight, leave Boston, and never come back. Or the next time, they would finish the job." He finally looked at her, and she saw the full weight of his shame, his pain, his helplessness. This was the ghost that haunted him. Not just the loss of his money, but the brutal, violent betrayal by a man he had called his friend. "So I ran," he said, his voice thick with self-loathing. "I took what little money I had left, came west, and bought this land. I changed my name from Whitman to Ransom. I hid. I built this place as a fortress against the past. The money I have, Eliza, came from selling my family's property back east before all this happened. It is the only clean thing I had left." He gestured to the iron box, to the collection of papers that represented the ruin of his former life. "This is the truth of it. This is the reason I cannot offer you my affections. I am a man living in the shadow of a powerful enemy. To connect yourself to me is to connect yourself to this, to danger." He stood there, vulnerable, exposed, having laid the ugliest parts of his life at her feet. He had given her every reason to turn and walk away, to get on the next train and never look back. Eliza did not move. She looked at the evidence of his pain, at the ledger books, the lying headlines, the photograph of the friend who had destroyed him. She looked at the faint scars on his face, and she felt not fear, but a wave of fierce, protective anger. She was not afraid of his past. She was angry at the injustice of it. She reached out and laid her hand on his, where it rested on the cold iron of the box. His hand was clenched into a fist. Her touch was gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he had just described. "You did not run, Cole," she said, her voice clear and strong in the quiet room. "You survived." He looked at their hands, at her fingers resting on his, and a shudder went through him. He slowly unclenched his fist. "I am not afraid of this," she said, her gaze meeting his, "or of Marcus Blackwood. What you have shown me is not a reason to leave. It is a reason to stay. I have spent the last weeks of my life running from whispers and shadows. I will not do it again." She took a deep breath, her decision settling in her heart with the weight of absolute certainty. "I choose this. I choose connection. I choose to stand here, with you, rather than run away alone." A look of stunned, profound gratitude washed over his face. The hardness in his eyes, the armor he had worn for so long, seemed to melt away, leaving behind the man he was meant to be. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. At that exact moment, the sound of a horse galloping hard into the yard broke the spell. A moment later, the office door burst open. It was one of the ranch hands, a young man named Jake. He was breathless, his face pale. He held out a small, folded yellow envelope. "From the telegraph office in town, Mr. Ransom," he panted. "A rider just brought it. Said it was urgent." Cole's hand tightened on hers. He released her and took the telegram. His face was a grim, hard mask as he tore it open. He read the short, clipped message aloud, his voice flat and cold. "Cole Ransom, stop! Have arrived in Denver on business. Stop. Request meeting to discuss matters of mutual interest. Stop. Marcus Blackwood." The name hung in the air like the smell of gunpowder. The past was no longer locked in the iron box. It was a few hundred miles away, and it was coming for them. The storm that had been threatening all morning finally broke. A low rumble of thunder echoed in the distant mountains, and a sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes. Cole stood for a long moment, the telegram trembling slightly in his hand. Then his jaw tightened. The look of the hunted animal was gone, replaced by the cold, hard resolve of a fighter. "Maria," he called, his voice sharp and clear. "Come in here, and bring Manuel with you." A moment later, the housekeeper and her son stood in the doorway, their face etched with concern. Cole did not waste words. "Marcus Blackwood is in Denver. He said he wants a meeting." Maria's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. "He will not set foot on this ranch," Cole said, his voice like iron. "And I will not go to Denver. We will meet on our terms, in a public place." He looked at Eliza, a silent question in his eyes. "The Grand Hotel," she said instantly, her mind racing. "In the dining room, in the middle of the day, with witnesses." He nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "Exactly. We fight him with the truth, in the light." He turned to his foreman. "Manuel, I want you to ride into town, now. Find Sheriff Morrison. Tell him I need to see him, urgently. Then find Henry Walsh, the lawyer. Tell him the same. Tell them I have evidence in a criminal matter from Boston and that the man involved is now in Colorado. Tell them I will meet them here, at this ranch, at dusk." Manuel nodded, his face grim. "I will ride now." "Jake," Cole said to the younger man, "I want you and 2 other men to take up positions on the high trails. Watch the road from Denver. If you see anyone who looks like they do not belong, I want to know about it immediately. Do not engage, just watch." The men left, a sense of grim purpose radiating from them. "Maria," Cole said, his voice softening slightly, "I want you to speak to the families. No one is to be alarmed, but everyone is to be watchful. Keep the children close to the houses." She nodded, her lips a thin, determined line. "They will be safe. Mr. Cole, we are all with you." She left, and they were alone again in the office. The evidence of Cole's past still spread on the desk between them. The first heavy drops of rain began to spatter against the window pane. The storm was here. Eliza looked at Cole. He was no longer the quiet, brooding recluse. He was a commander, a strategist, a man preparing for a battle he had been avoiding for years. He was fighting back. She began to neatly stack the newspaper clippings and the ledger books, placing them back in the iron box. It was not a past to be hidden anymore. It was evidence to be used. It was their ammunition. The rain came just after noon, a sudden, violent deluge that turned the sky to bruised purple and the main street of a sagebrush bend into a churning river of red mud. It hammered on the tin roofs with the sound of 1,000 drums and sent people scurrying for cover. The dining room of the Grand Hotel, usually quiet at this hour, was crowded and steamy, filled with ranchers, travelers, and townspeople trapped by the storm. It was a captive audience, and they were all waiting for the main act to begin. At a table in the center of the room sat Cole Ransom and Eliza Hart. Between them, her hand resting lightly on his arm. They were a portrait of calm resolve. To Cole's right sat Sheriff Bill Morrison, his badge a dull star on his wet vest, his expression impassive. To Eliza's left was Henry Walsh, a traveling lawyer with a reputation for being as sharp and unyielding as granite. On a chair beside Cole, looking small and yet impossibly heavy, was the iron box. They had been waiting for nearly an hour, the tension in the room as thick and palpable as the humid, rain-soaked air. The doors of the hotel swung open with a crash, letting in a gust of wind and water. 3 men stood silhouetted against the gray, streaming light. The man in the center was tall and impeccably dressed in a fine wool suit that seemed to repel the rain. His hair was silver at the temples, and his face was a mask of cold, predatory arrogance. This was Marcus Blackwood. Flanking him were 2 younger men, one, with Blackwood's arrogant features but none of his composure, was clearly his son. The other was a hard, wiry man with cold, watchful eyes, a man who looked like his only trade was trouble. Blackwood's gaze swept the room, dismissing the locals with a contemptuous glance. It settled on Cole, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He and his companion strode into the room, their expensive city boots leaving muddy tracks on the floor. They stopped at the table. "Cole," Blackwood said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that carried easily through the room. "How good to see you again. You have certainly found a rustic corner of the world to hide in." He ignored the other occupants of the table completely. "I trust you received my telegram. I suggest we retire to a private room to discuss our mutual interests." Cole did not rise. He met Blackwood's gaze, his own eyes as steady and unmoving as the mountains. "There is nothing to discuss in private. Marcus, anything you have to say to me, you can say right here, in front of my lawyer and the sheriff of this town." Blackwood's smile tightened. For the first time, he acknowledged the other men. "Lawyers, lawmen, how provincial. This is a business matter. Cole, a simple misunderstanding between old partners that can be resolved with a handshake." "There was no misunderstanding," Cole said, his voice low and clear. "There was theft and conspiracy, and it will be resolved by the law." Henry Walsh leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table. "Mr. Blackwood, I am Henry Walsh, counsel for Mr. Ransom. We are prepared to listen to any proposal you have to make, but be advised, this is an official proceeding, witnessed by the chief law enforcement officer of this county." Blackwood's son gave a short, ugly laugh. "The law in a place like this? You cannot be serious." "I am always serious when it comes to the law." "Young man," the sheriff said, his voice a quiet, dangerous rumble. He did not raise his voice, but the entire room fell silent to hear it. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. He had expected a frightened man hiding in the wilderness. He had not expected this organized public resistance. He changed his tactics. Very well, he said, pulling up a chair and sitting down. Uninvited. His men remained standing behind him like guards. Let us not be hasty. Cole, you were always emotional. You took our business disagreement far too personally. I am here to make amends. I'm prepared to offer you a substantial sum of money to compensate you for your perceived losses. Let us say $50,000 in cash. A fortune out here. I imagine all you have to do is turn over that box and sign a simple document stating that the matter is concluded. Eliza felt Cole's arm tense beneath her hand, but he said nothing. It was Walsh who answered. My client's good name is not for sale. Mr. Blackwood, and the contents of that box are not personal effects. They are evidence of multiple felonies. Evidence, Blackwood said with a dismissive wave of his hand. Old papers. Your word against mine. Who do you think a judge will believe, a disgraced fugitive, or one of the most respected businessmen in Boston? I believe, Walsh said, his voice like chipping ice, that a judge will believe the sworn testimony of 3 different shipping clerks who you bribed to remain silent. Clerks we have located. I believe he will believe the forensic analysis of the ink on your forged ledgers, and I believe he will believe Mr. Ransom. Blackwood's composure finally cracked. A dark flush rose on his neck. You have nothing, he hissed. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod to the man with the cold eyes. Pierce, the box. The man named Pierce moved with startling speed. He lunged for the chair holding the iron box, but Sheriff Morrison was faster. He shot to his feet, his body blocking Pierce's path. I would not do that if I were you, son, the sheriff said, his voice dangerously soft. Pierce hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then his hand went inside his coat. In a single, fluid motion, he drew a small, silver-plated pistol. A woman in the corner screamed. The room exploded into chaos. But before Pierce could even aim the weapon, 3 things happened at once. Sheriff Morrison's own Colt revolver appeared in his hand. Its dark muzzle pointed squarely at Pierce's chest. From a table near the bar, 3 large and rough-looking men who had been quietly nursing coffees shot to their feet. It was Manuel Torres and 2 of the Ransom Creek ranch hands. They moved not with the panic of the crowd, but with the grim purpose of trained men, forming a solid wall between their table and the rest of the room. And in the sudden, heart-stopping silence, Henry Walsh stood up. He held a small sheaf of papers in his hand, his voice, clear and cold, cut through the tension like a knife. Before you do anything foolish, Mr. Blackwood, the lawyer announced, his voice ringing through the hall, you should know that the original contents of that box are now almost entirely irrelevant. Blackwood stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. You see, Walsh continued, a thin, triumphant smile on his lips. This morning, I made several copies, certified, notarized copies of every fraudulent ledger entry, every forged manifest, and Mr. Ransom's full, detailed affidavit. The first set of copies was sent by registered post to the United States Attorney's Office in Denver. The second was sent to the office of the Massachusetts Attorney General. And for good measure, a third set was sent to a very interested journalist I know at the New York Tribune. They should all be arriving by tomorrow morning. He paused, letting the words sink in. Your leverage is gone, the truth is out, and it can no longer be threatened, or bribed, or beaten into silence. The color drained from Marcus Blackwood's face. He looked like a man who had just seen his entire world crumble to dust before his eyes. The fight was over. He had lost. The sheriff calmly disarmed a stunned and shaking Pierce. You are under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, he said. He then turned to Blackwood. And you, sir, are being detained on suspicion of conspiracy and intimidation of a witness. You will both accompany me to my office. As the sheriff led the men away, the stunned silence in the dining room erupted into a buzz of excited, astonished conversation. The town had seen it all. The whispers and rumors had been washed away by a flood of undeniable truth. Cole stood up, his face pale but his eyes clear. He looked at Eliza, and a slow smile spread across his face, a smile of profound, unburdened relief. He took her hand, and together they walked out of the hotel and onto the porch. The rain had stopped. The air was cool and washed clean, and the sun was breaking through the dark clouds in long, golden shafts, turning the puddles in the muddy street to liquid gold. The storm was over. "It is finished," Cole said, his voice quiet with wonder. He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "You did not run. You stayed." "I told you," she said, her own voice thick with emotion. "I choose connection. I choose you." The next morning, the world seemed newly made. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine. Eliza and Cole stood on the porch of the new schoolhouse. A bird was singing in a nearby aspen tree, its leaves a dazzling, rain-washed gold. The great dark slate of the blackboard was visible through the open doorway, wiped clean, waiting for the first lesson. Cole took both of her hands in his. "I made you a promise," he said, his voice low and serious, "that I would not offer you my affections until I could do so with a clean slate." He looked out at the bright, clean morning. "I believe that day has come." He looked back at her, his eyes full of a deep, quiet love. "Eliza Hart," he said, "at the train station, I asked you to stay with me. Now I am asking, may I stay with you?" Eliza's heart felt as if it would burst with a joy so pure and bright it almost hurt. This was not the end of a long journey. It was the beginning. She had come to this town to run away, but she had found the one place she was always meant to be. She smiled, her eyes shining. "From now on, Cole Ransom," she said, her voice full of love and laughter. "I am the one staying, not because I'm afraid to leave, but because this is where I want to be." Thank you for listening to our story. Please comment with where you are listening from so we can all connect. Subscribe to our channel Wild West Night. Like the video. And press the hype button to help this story be heard by more people.